Libertarianism is pro-immigration, pro-market, pro-trade.
More competitive, less centralized.
Not military confrontations, but peaceful interaction.
The war on drugs has been actually an unmitigated disaster.
Coercive. And as the name implies, this is a monopoly that gets its high market share because of some means, some method involving coercion. They either, maybe they're the mob, so they use guns, to make sure people buy their booze or whatever it may be. Or they use their connections with government to get special favors like, a law against their competition, or a law that requires consumers bail them out or buy their stuff, or any number of ways that it can happen. This is the kind of monopoly that even America's founders wrote against and opposed. Okay, they were looking at things like the old Navigation Acts that Britain had passed as early as 1651, which said if you want to do business with the American colonies, you got to do it across the Atlantic in ships made in Britain, okay, which is a special privilege granted to British shipbuilders at the expense of anybody who wanted to build a ship in America. And our founders said, we don't want that kind of thing, we want freedom of commerce. But you could bestow upon a company or companies a degree of monopoly power just by protecting them from competition. Government does it all the time. Something all of us who really believe in real free markets need to work against, because that's not a free market economy when you have companies getting all kinds of special favors, immunities, privileges, and so forth. I want to contend here tonight, in the time I have left, that Standard was a classic efficiency monopoly, not a coercive monopoly. I would defy anybody, and I don't know of anyone who has ever credibly made this a charge, to show that Rockefeller got his high market share because of some coercion or even special favors from government. I've never seen it. I see just the opposite, that this was a brilliant guy he was a master organizer of men and materials. He knew how to find the best people, and then when he hired them, he let them go. He wasn't the kind of guy who would micromanage them. He knew enough that when you find talent, you reward them, you cheerlead them, you work with them, and that's how you build a great company. You don't hire the best and then tell them at every turn what to do. They'll leave. He was just a great organizer and master of men and materials. He was also a phenomenal cost cutter. There's a famous story that Burton Folsom, in his great little history called The Myth of the Robber Barons, he talks about how Rockefeller would go to his own refineries and watch as the people working there did their various jobs, including the making of wooden barrels with metal staves around the barrels, to hold them together. He would watch how all of these processes are made, and he would often say, I think I found a way to do that a little more cheaply. In one case, he said, I think we can, our barrels will be just as strong, we don't have to worry about them breaking, if we used 2 drops of solder less than we're using. Okay, just 2 drops. And well, they adopted that. Well, when you're making millions of barrels, 2 drops of solder adds up. It's not an insignificant thing in the scheme of things. If you consider that's just one of many such things, he's finding ways to do. This is one of the beauties of free market capitalism, where you're not guaranteed to be successful, where if you don't serve customers and do it at a cost that allows you something left over, you don't know how to do it at a profit, then you better fix that or you're out of business. It's not like a government agency where it doesn't matter whether they make any money, do anything useful, or whatever. They get more funding typically, whether they're useful or not. So he was for many reasons, a master at business. And even his critics, like Ida Tarbell, you may have heard Ida Tarbell wrote a series critical of Standard Oil. I don't know if you know this, because it's not often brought out, but her father, she thought, was a victim of Rockefeller because he tried to make a go in the kerosene business, and he felt like Rockefeller, he couldn't compete with Rockefeller, so he went out of business. And poor Ida thought, oh, that was a terrible thing. That, I guess Rockefeller should have said, oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you out of business here. Let me keep you going so you can compete with me. I mean, the guy just couldn't compete. And so Ida had a bit of a grudge for that reason. But even she pointed out famously how Rockefeller was such a genius at bringing men and materials together, keeping costs low, and so forth. Nonetheless, I've said a lot of good things about Rockefeller. There are major charges against him that have to be addressed, and that's what I'd like to spend my remaining time on. What are the charges against Rockefeller? I've suggested he was a good businessman. He knew how to bring a product at ever lower prices and ever improving quality to ever more customers, not only here but across the world, competing with anybody from many, many countries who were in the same business. And yet people say, oh, but he was a bad guy. What are those charges? Here's the first one. I want to address them one at a time. This first one is predatory price cutting. Predatory price cutting. It's often reported in history texts that without much evidence, it's just, oh, he engaged in this practice, that's why, or one reason why he became as big as he was. He would slash the price of kerosene, and because he was big or better or whatever, newer or older than some of the new upstarts, he slashed the price, and because he had certain advantages, he could outlast all the others in the price war. And then once the others left the business in bankruptcy, then he, in a market devoid of competition, could jack his prices back up again. Oh, every big businessman does that or would love to do it. And certainly if they try, could get away with it. I mean, that's not an uncommon assumption. But let me tell you that this carries no weight whatever among serious economists, and for some very important reasons. First of all, wouldn't you guess that we would know by empirical evidence whether or not Rockefeller did this? I mean, prices, people pay prices. They're not secret, right? And anybody who feels gouged by one, they're going to scream about it. So we know what the prices of kerosene were. Do they look like anything like the predatory price-cutting theorists would suggest? Do you see a slashing of price and then a rise in price? No. All through the years, if I had something right here, I would be drawing a line that looked like this, steadily downward from 45 cents a gallon to 3 cents. You know, where's the evidence of the gouging? Where's the evidence that people left the market and then he raised the price? There's none of that. Empirical evidence doesn't support it. There was a great economist named John McGee who wrote, he was the first economist to say, look, people have been saying this for decades about Rockefeller. In October of 1958, John McGee published his findings in the Journal of Law and Economics in a path-breaking article and said, I'm going to be the first guy to really look into this. And he found that, number one, there's no evidence to support it. Prices don't look anything like what the predatory price-cutting theorists would suggest. And secondly, he said, Rockefeller would have been stupid had he tried this. And that's where you get into some of the fascinating details of, well, why didn't he do this? Isn't it easy to do for the big guy? Before I tell you about this in relation to Rockefeller, I want to tell you quickly a related story about a man who was, to this day, although he's been gone for 100 years, is still well known in a town where I lived for 30 years, Midland, Michigan. His name was Herbert Henry Dow. He started the Dow Chemical Company. Everybody's heard of that. He was a chemist in the 1870s and 80s. And he invented an electrolysis process whereby the chemical known as bromine could be withdrawn from the very briny water that we still have, I think, I don't live there, in the Midland, Michigan area. Very awful water. Anybody who has a well in Midland will tell you. It stinks, you know. It's because it's very briny, because for geologic reasons. Dow said, wow, I know how to get that stuff, the bromine, out of that briny water. And bromine is a valuable chemical. It's used in the making of aspirin and lots of other stuff, chemical processes for other things. The Germans had a number of companies that sort of dominated the world bromine market at the time. And here's this upstart, Dow, who starts in a little shack that is, there's a reproduction of it at now a museum in Midland. He's going to compete with these giants from Germany in the world bromine market right here in this little town of Midland, Michigan, because he found a way to get bromine out of that briny water so cheaply that he could undercut the price that the Germans were charging. The Germans, this is a great story that many Midlanders know, they learned what his plans were. They sent two guys all the way from Germany to Midland, Michigan to meet with him to tell him, don't you dare sell bromine outside of the United States. We got that world market. We don't want you in there selling cheap. He literally ordered them to leave the office, tossed them out. He wasn't the kind of guy who's going to take somebody from Germany telling him what to do. And so he started selling bromine anywhere he could find a buyer, all over the world, for 35 cents a pound, when the world price was 45 cents a pound. That's what the Germans had been charging, 45 cents. Now Dow's making a profit selling it for 35 cents. They get angry at him and say, all right, we told you to stay out of this. So they decide, we're going to drive this guy out of business. They drive the price down to 15 cents a pound. Okay, now you might think, oh, how's he ever going to compete with that? These big, giant German companies. You know what he does? Again, the genius of entrepreneurship. Dow tells agents, the Germans didn't know they were agents of his, but he says, go out and buy all the 15-cent bromine that those dummies will sell. And we'll just repackage it and put my name on it. And we'll sell it everywhere that they're not charging 15 cents. If there's wherever they're still selling for 35, 45, we'll sell it for 15. And the Germans start to say, where's all this demand coming from? And well, we better meet it, because if we don't meet it by producing more bromine and selling it at that cheap price, that market will go to this Dow guy. So they finally threw in the towel and realized, oh, it was Dow himself who was buying their dirt cheap stuff. And instead of being the prey, he turned out to be the predator. And this was a very important source of early capital that helped build the Dow Chemical Company. Now, I give you that example to suggest that the predatory price cutting theory is one of those things that's a lot easier said than done. People just think the big guy can do it and rarely think through the consequences, the effects, how others might respond to them. John McGee, in that article in the Journal of Law and Economics, when he investigated this, he said Rockefeller would have been stupid to even try this. Why? Several reasons. One, if you decide, hey, I'm big enough, I can slash my price and drive all the other guys out of business and then raise it once they're gone. You have to understand that price is only one aspect of competition, right? Have you ever bought something that was a little higher in price, maybe even a lot higher than somebody else was selling it for, but why did you pay that?
Because it wasn't Walmart.
It could be. Or there may have been other advantages. Maybe the guy selling it says, hey, the other guy won't tell you this, but I can guarantee a low price for a longer period if you start buying from me. Or maybe the logistics, the transportation, who knows? There may be various reasons why you might still buy it, even if it's a little higher. So to really be successful at this, at driving everybody else out, you can't just cut your price a little bit. You probably have to cut it a lot to outweigh all the other competitive things that could be thrown at you in these markets. So that makes the predatory price cutting idea very uncertain. All you know is if you embark upon it, you're just selling your stuff at a lot lower price than you used to be, with no guarantee that all these other competitors, even though they may be small, are going to somehow disappear. Okay, you don't know that. That's a lot easier said than done. Another second, this kind of deepens as you get into some of these other reasons. What will people do, customers, if all of a sudden there's this big guy who slashes the price to drive everybody else out? What are they going to do? Especially if they think this is only temporary, these low prices. They say, hey, let's stock up, let's buy more. So the big guy has to actually step up his production at quite possibly loss-inducing prices because people at a lower price will buy more. They'll stockpile, which also puts off the day when the